Welcome to everybody to tonight's webinar. My name is Lucy Cussen, and it's really great to have everybody join us, take the time to join us this evening. We're going to be talking this evening about anticipatory grief, so it's an important topic, and I don't want this presentation to feel formal. This session is about sharing and learning together and supporting one another. I also have a wonderful panel here with me today, and I'll be inviting them to share their experiences throughout. I know this topic is a very difficult topic, I suppose, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to go through it. And I also know this webinar is going out to members and non-members. I want to acknowledge right from the start the emotional weight of this important topic. When a pet's health is declining, carers are not just preparing for goodbye, they are already grieving, and that's what makes anticipatory grief so complex. I'm now going to invite my panel to just briefly introduce yourselves, please.
Hi, I'm Dawn Murray. Thank you for having me along tonight, Lucy.
Hi, I'm Niall Morton, and thank you, Lucy, for having me along tonight.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Godsell. Thank you very much, Lucy. It's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, okay. So what is anticipatory grief? What exactly do we mean by it? In terms of pet loss, anticipatory grief. In terms of pet loss, anticipatory grief is the term we use to describe the grief that begins before a pet has actually passed away. It often starts with it when a carer notices signs of illness, age-related decline, or after receiving a terminal diagnosis. The feelings can be complex: sorrow, dread, guilt, even helplessness, while you are still caring for and loving your pet. And it often includes what we call micro losses, grieving the little changes like loss of appetite, reduced mobility, or changes in personality long before the final goodbye. What's important is that anticipatory grief is not only normal, it's a profoundly human response to change and loss. It often goes unrecognised and is not spoken about. So let me turn to my panel of Dawn, Kirsty and Niall. And Niall, I'll throw this question out to you first of all. How do you... You're welcome, Niall. Just thought I'd start with you there. How do you normally explain anticipatory grief to clients in a way that helps them feel understood and less alone?
I think what I do is draw on my own experience of anticipatory grief when my own dog died, and really, it's almost like they often don't know they're in something named. They wouldn't be able to name it as anticipatory grief, but they already know that they're waiting for the day, and they're already noticing the losses, and they're already realizing that life is starting to change. And so I kind of explain it almost sort of by not explaining it, by just saying, like, how are you feeling? What are you noticing? What's almost like what's your gut telling you? Because when you've got your connection with your pet, they're kind of almost kind of like messaging you. I kind of feel, and you're picking up on it, and you might or not, say be able to kind of like name it or define it, but you kind of know something's changed, and that's if even if you haven't had like a diagnosis or a prognosis that that you're in final stages, you just kind of I get asked them to listen to themselves. Really, that's how I usually I kind of explain it, and if they ask what's going on for them, I say, well, get them to feel, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Very useful answer, Niall. Thank you very much for that. Dawn or Kirsty, would you have anything to add to what Niall has said for that question?
Well, I think, yeah, for a lot of clients that contact me, I think they're quite often they will say to me, I feel like I'm already grieving. And I think that ties in with what Niall's saying. A lot of people they're starting to notice the changes. Perhaps they realise, you know, if it's an elderly pet, that the pet's in decline. Yeah, for them, they're almost too preoccupied with the health of their pet to really stop and acknowledge that this is a period of grief that they're experiencing. And I think it tends to be post the loss of a companion animal, they can focus on virtually entirely on their grief and what that means to them and how that's manifesting with them. But prior to that, they, like you said, Lucy, they have the responsibility to care for their pet, and at the same time they're trying to ignore what's going on with themselves, with the grief, and they don't actually have time to stop to realise the impact that anticipatory grief is having on them, both physically and emotionally, which, as we know, can be exceptionally draining.
That's a very good point, Joan, about not recognising it as grief because you're so preoccupied with caring for the pet. So that's an excellent point. Kirsty, would you have anything else to add there?
The only thing that I have found in the past is almost giving people permission to be sad before they need to be sad, if that kind of makes sense. People always think they have to keep going and they have to look after their pet while their health is rapidly declining or it's a slow burn, but they don't actually give themselves space. So I think giving people, like verbally giving them permission to feel those feelings is really important.
Okay, good responses from everybody there. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, so we shall move on to our next slide. Being well. Here. Okay. Now, sorry, now we're just gone too far here. Hold on. Yep. Okay. So, okay, the emotional roller coaster of anticipatory grief. So, basically, anticipatory grief, as we said, is a roller coaster of emotions. One day, the pet seems brighter, eating well and playing, which gives the carer hope. The next day, there is a decline, withdrawal, loss of appetite or confusion, which brings fear, sadness and dread crashing back. This constant shift between hope and despair is exhausting for carers, leaving them emotionally and physically drained. On top of that, family and friends may not understand, so your grief goes unrecognised or dismissed. They might say, at least your pet is still alive, not realising that the carer is already grieving. This can feel very isolating, leading to disenfranchised grief. To bring back in my panel here again, I suppose, and this time I'll start with Dawn, I think. When a client describes this roller coaster experience to you, how do you help them feel understood and supported in the ups and down, in that up and down cycle?
Well, I think it's you know, a lot of the times it's the client doesn't understand that our grief is, you know, like a roller coaster. They actually struggle to come to terms with the fact that there are highs and lows. And with anticipatory grief, you said there about the cycle when your pet's feeling better one day, etc. And a lot depends on how long, because anticipatory grief can start. You know, there's no official start date for anticipatory grief. For some people, it can be a year, 18 months, 2 years. I've heard of clients say to me that, you know, potentially their pet could live another 4 or 5 years, but they're already dreading that. They've already got that sense of dread that the pet's going to die. So in effect, they're sort of putting themselves into that anticipatory grief mode way long before they have to. So I think you just, you know, it's validating that what the client is experiencing is perfectly normal. And anticipatory grief, can also be the long goodbye. And throughout that period of time, there are going to be a lot of highs and lows, where the pet does have wonderful times, and they can be looking very fit, very healthy, just as they were when they were much younger, and that can lead to a sort of give the client sometimes false hope, that in actual fact they made a mistake, that their pet is health is not in the decline. And it is very, very difficult to deal with that, the highs and the lows, and these highs and lows can lead to a lot of anxiety. And I think for me, it's important to address with my client the impact that these highs and lows can have on us physically as well as emotionally, because physically we can make ourselves very, very ill when we're experiencing such highs and lows in life. It can be very, very confusing for people, because one minute they're in the depths of despair, and the next minute the pet's absolutely fine. It got up, it's eating properly, it's going out on a walk, it's playing with its friends, it's playing with the ball, it's out in the garden, it's having a great time, and then the very next day they're plummeted again to the depths of despair, and overall that is not particularly good as well for our physical health as well as our emotional health.
That's a good response there, Dawn, and it does cover the situation accurately. Anticipatory grief can go on for quite a considerable amount of time. It's not just in the last few weeks or months. It can actually go on for quite a lot longer than that, and it's a huge emotional and physical strain, as you have said. Niall, have you anything that you would like to add?
Well, I think one, Dawn's about timing. I think one of the most difficult things sometimes, and this is going off tangent slightly, is when someone's got two pets and one has died, and then they already switch into anticipatory grief about the other one and become hyper vigilant, even though they might be a youngster. So that's one another part. But the other thing as well is, I think what's really I kind of find helpful for clients is to stay firmly rooted in the day that you're in. So to kind of work with the fact that you're looking at an end, whether it's something that's been diagnosed, whether you just know someone's getting older and they're slowing down. The really important thing is I find the most helpful is to stay completely present in the day that you're in, because the thing is we project, and we project all the what ifs and whens and hows and ifs and buts, and then we lose sight of like where we are, and the ups and downs are absolutely exhausting. But to stay as present as possible, and to try and minimize the worries and the what ifs, etc., which is immensely difficult, because we've all been there ourselves. So I'm talking about an ideal here, but I know it's not as easy as that. But that I find is one of the most helpful things, because otherwise you don't enjoy the good times, and then you kind of think that then you're kind of stuck in a bad day and you won't get another good day. So all of that kind of thing.
Okay, very good. I like the staying in the present, because I think that's very, very important advice that is hard to follow, but
very hard, but it's
very hard to follow, but makes a huge amount of sense. Yeah. Kirsty, would you have anything additional to add there?
Just going back to what Dawn was saying about how the impact can throw you out and bring you back again. I think carving time out of your day or your week routinely for yourself or for those in your family that are experiencing anticipatory grief, making some time for yourself to just take a moment, take a breath, whatever your vice may be, whether it's meditation or whether it's going for a walk, whether it's seeing friends and family, whether it's just sitting quietly and watching TV or reading a book. It's really important to also have some time for yourself, even if you're allowing yourself to process things subconsciously. It's just, it helps to cement everything that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Indeed, it's very important too to take the time out for yourself in the midst of everything that's going on, even half an hour to do something that brings you some bit of pleasure in the midst of all of it is very good advice. Okay, thanks everybody for that. And we'll move along to the next slide. So, here, and slide is this one. Okay, the next slide is Rusty's story, which is also my story, and it's just to give a personal example of anticipatory grief. Rusty's story brings the experience of anticipatory grief to life. Rusty was my soulmate dog. He was 17 and a brave little soldier. He had pancreatitis and chronic kidney disease. I would say easily for the last year of his life, I suffered from anticipatory grief, as I knew he could not go on much longer. But at the forefront of my mind was always his quality of life. Eventually his kidney disease progressed, and in those last few weeks, each small victory, like eating a little chicken or managing a short walk, felt precious. But I also saw his spark fading, which was heartbreaking. My priority at the time was that we would make the right decision at the right time in the best interests of Rusty. At all times, I remained in close contact with the vet to ensure I had the benefit of medical expertise. It was the reason I contacted Dawn initially, to ensure I had as much information as possible. Rusty was also the reason I became a pet bereavement counsellor. This story shows the balancing act we all as pet carers face, celebrating small wins while slowly preparing ourselves for the goodbye. It highlights the depth of love and the deep pain of watching a beloved pet decline. And to come back to my panel again now, how does sharing personal, and Kirsty, I'll start with you this time, if that's okay. How does sharing personal stories like Rusty's help normalise the anticipatory grief experience for other pet carers you support?
I think anticipatory grief is so unknown that I think to have somebody share their personal story with you and say, actually, we've been here, we've done this, I've been through this process, I know, you know, the sort of feelings that you may be feeling and what's creeping in, it validates again their outlook on what's going on. And I think sharing that personal story, it creates a connection and gives your client something to base off of, something to work with and connect with, and make them feel like they're not on their own. They're not, you know, fighting this unseen battle alone without any support. And knowing someone else has been through or is going through the same thing, it can be really reassuring.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it's all about sharing a personal story is important. And indeed, it's important also not to let your own personal story, of course, overshadow the counselling experience. But I do find sharing a personal story lets people know that lets the client know that you understand what they're going through and that you're coming from the same place. Can I bring the same question to Niall, perhaps next? Okay.
I completely agree with Kirsty, and I think sometimes, you know, it's helpful because there's many a time with my own dog, much as I didn't want the journey to end, but I thought, I'm sick of the grief. I want the grief to end. I want the anticipatory grief to end, and I know I just want it to finish. And I think if you can share things like that to show that, you know, actually, you know, we have these thoughts, and they might be the thoughts in the moment because we're kind of just so desperate and we're so tired and we're so wrung out by it. But to be able to share them with a client can often open things up for a client to actually say, this is how I feel and I'm feeling so guilty about it. And so it's about rapport building, as Kirsty mentioned. It's about, you know, that thing of just sharing a bit of personal information, which can completely open up, you know, a session. And, you know, so much of grief, as we know, whatever type of grief it is the damage it does when it's bottled up. And if Kirsty was talking about permission earlier. But if we, by sharing a bit of our own personal stuff and perhaps some of the depths of our feelings, which people might not expect us to have, as pet bereavement counsellors, actually normalises it. And that's the permission side. And you have to feel your way with a client, but I think if you do it well, it usually is beneficial.
Thank you. I do think the permission to grieve part is, which both of you have mentioned, is really, really important, because sometimes before the pet dies, people don't think they should be grieving or think there's something wrong, that they're grieving before the pet because the pet is still there. So I think that's important. Dawn, would you have anything to add to that question?
No, just basically, yeah, I agree with Kirsty and Niall. The obviously self-disclosure when it's relevant, and if you can be relatively brief as well, but it can really give that emotional connection with your client, whereby they can then, as Niall said, they can then understand that we, having been through the situation with our own pets, we do know that there's moments. I think an awful lot of people in anticipatory grief do have times where they feel, oh gosh, this is awful, and their life has been put on hold, and they usually immediately caveat that by saying to me, oh, but it's not a problem, because they're almost afraid that, as Niall said, they're just so exhausted. And of course, it really depends, a lot depends on the pet owner, who, what their circumstances are, what their support network is around them, as to how they are actually coping and dealing with their anticipatory grief. Because I've had, some of the most heartbreaking stories you could ever hear from clients who are literally nursing their pets round the clock, and still working, still trying to work full time, because they've still got bills to pay, they've got veterinary bills to pay, they've got their home household bills to pay, and they're on their own. They have little or no support from friends or family. They're basically doing everything themselves, and they are tired, they're weepy, they're exhausted, and I think that there's a great fear comes in with anticipatory grief, whereby when somebody has been providing palliative care like that round the clock, and all the emotions that they're experiencing, they are very afraid they'll get the timing wrong, but quite often they want to bring that timing forward because they're so exhausted, and yet they feel so guilty for even thinking that that they could perhaps contact their vet a bit earlier. So just being able to share and say, no, look, that's okay, that's perfectly normal. We've all felt that as well, But I think by that point, they're reaching out to a pet bereavement counsellor or specialist who actually understands what it is to experience these thoughts. It is quite often all the respite that the client actually needs is because they know they've got that support that's been validated, everything that they're experiencing. And just one thing that I'd like to touch on, I mean, your story with Rusty is so moving, and I know what a wonderful pet owner you are, and Rusty was a very, very special dog. And it's that contact with the vet, and this is something that comes up quite a lot. Some of the clients, when they contact me regarding it, anticipatory grief, that end of life, all the sort of questions that are coursing around their mind. The first thing I like to establish is, when did they actually speak to their vet? When was the last time their pet had a health check? And a lot of people say, oh, well, I haven't actually been to the vet yet. or haven't been for months because they're afraid that the vet's just going to recommend euthanasia. But in actual fact, that's not always going to be the case. And they phone us, you know, instead of actually going to their vet. So I always recommend that they take their pet to the vet and let the vet, who's the best person to give them an idea, because it's fear of the unknown that can make the anticipatory grief so much worse.
Indeed, that's exactly right. And I think it's also the fear of going to the vet for people is a natural thing, but it's also probably the most important thing you can do is talk to the vet, because the vet is the person in the end with the medical expertise. So that is very, very important. I know we're getting some comments into the chat, and we'll come back to the comments in the chat afterwards, perhaps, if that's okay. Thank you. So we'll share the next slide again here. Yeah. And this is the slide. Perfect. Right. Okay. One of the hardest parts of anticipatory grief is understanding the difference between pain and suffering. Our pets are experts at masking pain. They may still wag their tails, accept food, or enjoy a cuddle, even when their bodies are shutting down. But suffering isn't always physical. It can be emotional or cognitive. Pets with conditions like canine cognitive dysfunction may seem lost, pacing, or withdrawn, and that suffering is just as real. The scale, which has 5 H's and 2 M's, is a tool we can use to assess quality of life, but even it has its limits. It was developed by Alice Villalobos and stands for heart, hunger, hydration, hygiene, happiness, mobility, and more good days than bad. A score under 35. Sorry, can I just flick my slide there? So 1 second, now this is going a little. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, a score of under 35 may suggest a diminished quality of life. However, this scale is limited when dealing with canine cognitive dysfunction or emotional suffering, as it focuses on physical metrics. And that again is where close communication with the vet comes in. As we were mentioning, the vet is the expert with the required medical knowledge and experience so closely, and knowledge and experience, and so closely linking in with the vet is just very, very important. The other point is that carers also need to trust their own gut instinct and may see a tired, sad look in their pet's eyes. So just to bring a question to my panel again, Donna, I think I'll start with you for this one. How do you explain to clients the difference between pain and suffering so that the client understands what suffering is, basically, I suppose?
Well, I tend to, at the very beginning of any call session that I have with a client, is I try to, we tend to get very limited information from the client prior to speaking to them, prior to the session. So I want to ascertain as much information as I possibly can from the client about their pet, because unfortunately, for a lot of people who have pets, and I'll take a dog for example, because obviously the majority of our clients that contact us have dogs, but they seem to be under the impression that if a dog is still eating or wagging its tail or going out for the toilet, that it's not actually therefore suffering. And I think people's interpretation of what suffering is needs to be addressed as well. The quality of life scale is very subjective, and I think that's why it's absolutely imperative for anybody who has any concerns about their pet, now that is any health anything relating to their pet's health, they should absolutely get the advice from their vet. There's no two ways about it. There is quite a gulf between, people think if their pet isn't in pain, then they don't have to do anything and everything's roses in the garden. And I think the vet's input is absolutely vital. And yes, I have had clients say they didn't go on very well with their vet, or some clients have said that they were frightened they would be charged a consultation fee. I've heard 1,001 different reasons why people would avoid going to their vet. And a lot of it, when you actually drill down and speak to your client, you realise that it's their fear. They're actually afraid. But it's far better that we are armed with the knowledge and we can do something. But as I can't remember if it was Niall or Kirsty had said earlier on, is listening to that, or yourself, Lucy, said about listening to your gut feeling. But I think when it comes to even a quality of life scale, excuse me, they're very good and they're very useful for a vet to look at, but they're so subjective that for me personally, I would always encourage my client to go and speak to the vet if they're in any way concerned about their pet's health. I think it's for me, that's an absolute no-brainer. They have to go and see their vet, because I'm not a qualified vet. I don't give out veterinary advice. All I can do is in the best interest of the pet as they speak to their vet.
Absolutely. Kirsty, I'll turn that question to you next, if you have anything additional to add.
I often kind of break it down into pain can be managed by external factors such as medication, complementary therapies, surgery if needed, change in routine and habits. So pain can be managed, suffering can't be managed. Suffering is the point where pain is no longer managed and is now a factor of quality of life. I think it's a very basic way of looking at it, but I feel that can break it down for clients when they are lost in the anticipatory grief and they are lost in the level of care that they're giving and all of the stresses and all of the fatigue that comes with it. Can we manage it? If we can manage it, great. If we can't, then that's when you need either your quality of life scale or you need a non-emotive viewpoint from your veterinarian.
Absolutely, indeed. And now, do you have anything additional to add to the question?
Well, yes, I mean, we're very good at deluding ourselves, because we'll look at suffering and actually we'll convince ourselves there isn't any suffering. What I always, well, 9 times out of 10, going back to my old friend of dignity, is, if a dog, for instance, is very immobile and they're side in their bed, they're perhaps sodding themselves, and you know that this is not normal behavior and it's something that's just started to happen, and you can tell that they're not happy about that, and that the whole situation is also because it's not just where they are, it's where we are as carers as well, and what our emotions are projecting onto them when they start to, if you like, suffer. And I think sometimes I've had people actually, say, and I've suggested to people, if you're not sure and you've got some behavioural problems or such, like, if you maybe take some pictures or take a video and see if your vet is up to just having a quick look at them, or whether you can send them in and get an opinion. I've had them ask, as Dawn said, we're not vets, but they've can you look at them? And I go, well, no, because I can't give you an opinion on that's actually going to be anything other than confuse the issue. But as I say, it's as Kirsty said, the suffering is, we might be able to alleviate it a bit, but it's where we know my kind of thing is their dignity is starting to be compromised, and we're in charge of their dignity. That's our deal, I think. You know, when we bring them into our lives at whatever age and for whatever reason, you know, when we get to towards the end, it's like their dignity rests with us. And as you said with Rusty, you know, quality of life, you can never lose sight of that. And sometimes I think it's useful to say to them, imagine if that was happening to you as a person, how would you feel? Just to kind of ground it down, and as Kirsty said, people can get very lost in their level of caring and the whole emotion of caring, but actually sometimes just step away from it and just to say, imagine that it's, you know, you're suffering those things. It's like, well, how would you feel? Okay, one size doesn't fit all. It's different, you know, often for everybody, but that's just some thoughts.
Good. That was really good from everybody, and I like Niall's. I like the idea of dignity being the key operative word there. I think that just really spoke volumes, and I think it was very well put. Thanks to very much to everybody for that contribution. I'll move along to our next slide. Being well. Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Yeah, here we are. Okay. When emotions are, I suppose, when emotions are high, it's hard to see the bigger picture, and that's as well where journaling can be so powerful. By writing down daily notes on your pet's appetite, their activity, behavior, and mood, carers can track patterns which you might otherwise miss. Over time, journaling really can reveal whether the good days are outnumbering the bad, or whether confusion and withdrawal are becoming more frequent. It brings clarity in a fog of emotions, and it can also help bringing the journal to the vet to make more informed recommendations. So Kirsty, perhaps in this time, could you share an example where either journaling or something else you recommended really helped a client feel more confident in their decision?
Yeah, so it's really, again, very simple, but I often recommend them to go and buy a very small daily diary, just an easy date at the top, small page diary, and just to note down between 1 and 5 or 1 and 10 or whatever their preferred scale is, how good we are on that day. And to look at things, basic things like, do we want to go for a dog, for example? Do we want to go for a walk today? Are we playing with our toys today? Did we enjoy our dinner and our breakfast? When grandma came round, did they meet them at the door? And things like that, little tiny things that actually we overlook in the grand scheme of things when our pets get ill. And it is basic, you know, pulling it back to basics and getting them to note down in this little diary, scale of 1 to 10, few keywords, maybe something that they were concerned about or something good that happened, so they can look back and physically see an improvement or a decline. And I think sometimes if your client is hesitating with the decision or lost in, do I proceed, do I carry on, do I stop, do I change the meds, sometimes having it in black and white in a very small, easy format that's, you know, no pretenses, can be the obvious sign that they need.
Very good. Thank you for that good contribution, Kirsty. Niall, would you have anything else that you could add to that?
I think that idea is fantastic, because
Yes,
and it's something, but I also sometimes, you know, people get kind of too overwhelmed to even do that. And I find with younger people, with technology, sometimes it's keeping this, and I totally agree. I'm a great see it in black and white person, and I'm written with a pen, and there it is in your writing, and there's no doubt about who wrote it, what's going on. You know, I'm of an age when that suits me down to the ground. But looking at some people that like to do it differently, even like an audio note, you know, create a file on your phone, make an audio note saying, like, you know, Fluffy had their breakfast and we're really keen on it. And actually, when you play it back, not only do you hear the words, but you hear the tone of your voice then. You actually know as well whether you were feeling good about the day, whether you're feeling bad. It's, you know, not again one size fits all, but that's just another way of keeping things recorded. Maybe a little video, whatever suits. Some people, you know, love the technology, and that can work as well.
Very good, thank you. Now, and Dawn, I think I didn't ask you. Do you have anything else that you would like to add there?
Yeah, no, I'm completely agree with
Robert?
Niall. I like pen and paper. So I would probably get quite lost trying to advise clients anything other than take a photograph or take a short video. But yes, certainly pen and paper, writing it down. And I think as well with pen and paper, there's so many benefits of actually doing that as opposed to us always going to our phones. And I know it's younger, it's a generational thing, I appreciate that. But I think even for different generations, it is quite often a good idea for them to step back from their phones and just write it down. As opposed to, you know, and if it's a lot of it can be really vital information for the vet to understand exactly, you know, this, you know, the progress or otherwise of somebody's pet as to how they've been on certain days, what they've been eating or not eating, and how often, you know, how regular these occurrences are happening. And that can be from eating to being excited to going to the toilet, etc., etc. And if the vet can actually see it written down in black and white, it's a bit easier for them rather than for somebody standing in the veterinary surgery. Oh wait, I mean, I wait to flick through my phone, or wait to find you this, and you know. So I'm with Niall. I'm old-fashioned. I'll go for the pen and paper every time to recommend my clients do it that way.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for just having something in black and white, whatever means that is done, really. It's just, yeah, very, very helpful. Okay, thanks everybody for that. I'll move on to next slide here. Okay, and okay. The emotional load of the carer. So the emotional load on carers during anticipatory grief, and we've touched on some of this already, but we'll just keep going and maybe raise some additional points. The emotional load on carers during anticipatory grief is enormous. They may feel sadness, guilt, anger, anxiety, and even denial, often all in the same day. On top of that, there's the physical exhaustion of caregiving itself. Perhaps getting up multiple times at night to let the dog out to the toilet or to administer medication. The caregiving can be all-consuming. Many carers even feel guilty even thinking about euthanasia, as if they're betraying their pet, when in fact it comes from love. All of these emotions are normal, but they're incredibly heavy to carry. The emotions reflect the love and responsibility we all feel for our pets as important members of the family. So forget who I should come to now, but I'm just going to take Niall perhaps first of all. Niall, how do you personally approach sessions with clients who are drowning in these emotions to make them feel validated and supported?
Well, one, it's as always, it's about listening to what they're saying and encouraging them to expand on how they're feeling, and to kind of like not be often sort of like euphemistic, or to just, you know, really say it how it is. But I think the most important thing is just to normalize it. And it's a you know, it's a great thing around grief where, you know, we come down to the fact that what you're feeling is normal. You're not a freak, you're not a bad person, you're not, you know, they're normal things. And, you know, I can tell you from my own experience, you know, I'll say to a client that, you know, what you're going through is, you know, it's being honest and saying that, you know, it's what happens. And, you know, and sharing it, and you know, it's, if you like, making sense of it, of why those feelings are coming up, and sort of how they're coming up, and kind of like where they might take you to or not take you to, and you know, how again anticipatory grief goes just like every other grief in stages, ups and downs. You're, you know, back to one stage, if you like, the stages of grief, and then, you know, an hour later you'll be somewhere else. And it's just again, letting them know that there's support for them, but it's kind of what should we say? It's bringing it into being normal, and it's horrible, absolutely horrible, one of putting it better, but it's something that it can't be denied. It's there, and actually facing it and if you like working with it actually then can kind of like bring some of the stress down from it, and actually then the experience, although because call it becomes less stressful for the carer and for the pet itself as well. I think I lost my thread there a bit, sorry.
No, you're doing well.
I was following you.
You're doing well. No, you're doing well, Niall. Thank you very much indeed. If Dawn, would you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think we, you know, in anticipatory grief, we can feel that we, you know, our emotions and in life in general, everything is just completely out of control. And not only do we get all these emotions in the same day, we can get them all in the same 5 or 10 minutes. We can experience everything, anger and guilt, etc., all at once. One of the things that I think is quite important, and one of the things that I like to address with clients is to try and get some of that control and that order back. Is like Niall said, let's work with it, and that is to. A lot of the times that people feel a wee bit out of control or overwhelmed with everything that's going on in anticipatory grief is if, for example, they've been told by their vet that they need to be, you know, the end is nigh, basically, and they really need to be looking or starting to think about euthanasia. That's as we have all said before, that is an option treatment. But is for the client to make a plan, to sit down and make their plans, because a lot of it is the anxiety fear of what is going to happen, and that's because they have no plan. They don't know what's going to happen. And when I say what's going to happen, making plans is not just planning for the day, it is also planning for what plan B, as everybody knows I love my plan B, to make sure that they have a plan in place if everything just doesn't go to plan. If a pet's health deteriorates rapidly during the night, at the weekends when they can't get to a vet, what's the backup, what's the veterinary contact numbers that they do have. And I think the key thing with planning ahead is once and we can go through all the, you know, we can discuss all the different things that somebody may wish to have on their plan, where obviously the euthanasia is going to take place at home or at the vets, looking at bucket lists, etc., etc. So we can go through each step that somebody may wish to have in their plan, all their aftercare options, what's available to them. But once that is committed to paper, put it away somewhere safely, that they know they can get it as and when they will need it. Is not then to, you know, they're not then having to have all these fears, concerns, anxiety constantly coursing through their mind. What will happen? When is it going to happen? Is if they have some sort of plan in place that they can turn to. And once the plan's there, then they can start focusing on spending some real quality time with their pet, and it takes a lot of the burden away of that worry and anxiety of what lies ahead once they've committed it to paper.
Perfect, Dawn, thank you. Kirsty, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that what just echoes what Dawn says, the importance of planning. I personally am terrible at recognizing when I'm doing too much and getting overwhelmed and providing too much care to something else and not myself. And I unfortunately rely an awful lot on other people to tell me to stop, which is a huge character flaw, but we're working on it. But I do require someone else to say to me, you know, stop. think outside the box, take a breath. And I think that's really important for us as counsellors to remember, is it is okay to tell somebody to stop, because sometimes they might need it. They might need someone to just stop what they're doing and make space for them. And I think the way to shoehorn that in and to get that process rolling is to help them put that plan in place. Because it's, once you've got the plan in place, or once you're even writing the plan, it does forces your subconscious to slow down, and it forces you to look at it from outside the box. And I can't stress the importance of that enough. It was a game changer for me when I learned about that from Dawn. And it's something I go back to every single time.
It is a most valuable thing indeed, and I think we have preempted my next slide, but I'm going to go through my next slide anyway. Thanks very much for that contribution, everybody. Okay, so we're going to take my next slide here. Okay, just this one. Okay, let's just move to this one. Yep. Okay, so I think we've said some of this already, but I'm going to go through very briefly, perhaps. Pet bereavement counsellors play such an important role in all aspects of pet grief, and in particular with anticipatory grief. We can validate anticipatory grief and reassure carers that their feelings are normal. We help them distinguish between pain and suffering, as we mentioned, within the boundaries of pet bereavement counselling. Important to recognise boundaries, and always respecting the medical knowledge of the vet. We also help clients prepare practical plans for euthanasia, and what Dawn and Kirsty have both touched on is what we call Plan A and Plan B, so that clients become less fearful of the unknown. We encourage carers to create meaningful memories, whether that's a pet bucket list, taking photos, or sharing special meals. And also touched on by Kirsty in the last slide is we remind carers also to look after themselves too, because their well-being matters. Pet bereavement support is not just about emotional support, it's also about practical support. And the question I was going to ask with this slide is now null and void, because everybody has talked about it in the last one. But I suppose just from my own point of view, the importance of the Plan A and Plan B was absolutely vital, just to bring it back to Rusty for one moment, because 6 weeks before Rusty passed away, I had contacted Dawn and I had come up with a Plan A and a Plan B. That Plan A and Plan B went into a drawer until it was the time to have the Plan A and Plan B, but it was a lifesaver. There's no getting away from it. So to have a Plan A, which is the ideal plan, and hopefully the ideal plan will work out. Thankfully, in our case, it actually did. Or a Plan B, where you have the emergency situation. It just puts it away in a little box for you, and you can take it when you need it. And it was one of the best things anybody could ever have told me, I have to say. So I suppose I just want to kind of maybe reach out to my panel here in a different way, kind of the practical support. People sometimes think of pet bereavement counsellors as offering emotional support, whereas I would say that, and maybe we'll just throw it out to Dawn in this case, first of all, the practical support that we provide to people is just as important, if not more important, than the emotional support.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people come to us specifically for practical advice, suggestions, which actually ties in quite nicely. And I know we said we'd go to the questions at the end, but I would really like to touch on the question that Rob has put to us, because he said he was interested to hear the panel's experiences of how often clients reach out for pet bereavement counselling prior to their pet passing. I've always assumed that the majority of clients are getting in touch once their pet has passed. And we'd be keen to know if clients struggling with anticipatory grief are making up a substantial percentage of your client base. Well, the answer to that question is we're all different. When I say we're all different, the type of clients that we get tends to vary, because pet owners may be more inclined post euthanasia to go to a counsellor. psychotherapist, somebody who specialises in CBT, for example, or any of the other therapies that they may think is useful. For somebody who specialises in pet bereavement, like myself, and I'm speaking on behalf of the panel too, but they will obviously have their own clients that are attracted to their particular service for a particular reason. But I would say it's in the region of about 40% of my clients are pre-euthanasia and all looking for, well, say they're all looking for practical support, whether or not they know that when they come on to speak to me, because a lot of them pre-euthanasia, they are just at a complete loss. They just don't know what to do next, or they are looking for me to explain the euthanasia process. If they are in two minds whether they should stay with their pets, there's what aftercare options are available. Last week I had 2 calls from clients about freeze drying specifically, one after the other, which is quite unusual because I haven't had a call like that for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden I get 2 in the 1 week. So a lot of, I think it really depends on people's interpretation of the work that we do. And because I'm more inclined to refer to myself as a pet bereavement specialist, that's probably why I get a lot of calls pre-euthanasia as opposed to post-euthanasia. So I hope that answers Rob's question.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I hope I kept on track for yours too, Lucy.
No, you're perfectly fine. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to go back to, now I've lost my slides here. Okay, sure. Okay, this now my slides are just going skew in a little bit, but okay, resume slideshow. Okay. Okay, let me just see. Yeah, okay, we're okay. I think I'm just going to briefly, because we're nearly at time anyway. So, obviously, I suppose grieving continues after the pet passes. We're not going to go into detail on that tonight, but carers can feel sadness, anger, and guilt, and all of the grief, all the normal, wide-ranging grief emotions. As counsellors, we continue to support carers after goodbye, walking alongside them as they rebuild routines and find meaning in their memories. I'm not going to, in the interest of time, ask anybody anything on the panel about pet loss after euthanasia here, and I'm just going to go to the last slide here. So as we wrap up, let's just hold on to this, I suppose, that anticipatory grief is real, valid, and profoundly human. Carers need both emotional and practical support, and as pet bereavement counsellors, we provide practical tools, empathy and compassion, and we can form part of a supportive team together with vets and other professionals. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and as part of our role in helping carers redirect that love into memory and meaning. And in the interest of time, what time have we? I don't know, I've lost the time, but I'm just going to throw out one question just very, very briefly to any member of my panel there who wants to answer it first of all. Could one of you just share one key piece of advice you would give to pet carers currently going through anticipatory grief? Just any one point at all that you can think of just to close us off. Thank you.
I would, for me, Lucy, it would be, I think they need to remember some self-care, because somebody who's emotionally and physically drained is going to struggle, not just in the care of their pet, but what they have ahead. So they need to keep topping up that emotional tank and looking after their physical health as well.
Perfect. That's a good answer, Dawn. Thank you. Were there any more questions in the chat that we could very, very briefly take, or was that each done?
Yeah, no, it was just Rob. I thought that was a really
Perfect.
good,
It was a really good question
from Rob. Yeah, you know,
yeah.
Ideal for anticipatory grief.
Absolutely, indeed. Okay, I think as we have hit the hour, we'll wrap it up at that point. And just to say thanks very much to everybody who attended and listened in. I hope it was informative, and a special thanks to all my panel who answered all my questions as well, very, very well, and contributed excellently. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Thank you.